The retirement cake was still on the table when Kevin Prosser told someone I was finished. I know the exact words he used. I know who was in the room. I know what he was wearing, because I just watched him shake 40 hands and smile, in a way that I used to think was charm. I wasn't there for that conversation, but I heard every word of it. My name is Walter. I spent 42 years building a commercial HVAC company from a two-man crew in my garage to 35 employees and $1.8 million in active municipal contracts. I started as a sheet metal apprentice in 1975. I was good at the work, and eventually, I was good at the business, and those are two different things that took two different amounts of time to learn. This is the story of how I retired. Welcome to Real Life Verdict. Get comfortable. The people in this story had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. I want to tell you who I actually am before I tell you what happened, because the two things are connected in ways that Kevin Prosser never understood. I drive a 2004 Ford Ranger with 287,000 miles on it. The dash has a crack that I've covered with a strip of foam rubber because it stops the rattle. The toolbox in the bed has been relined with rubber mat 3 times. When people ask me why I don't buy something newer, I don't have a good answer. The truth is, I never think about it. Every spring before the county fair opens, I walk the exhibition halls at the fairgrounds with a clipboard and check furnace filters and compressor belts. I've done it for 11 years. I do it because someone has to do it, and because I like the way the halls smell before the animals and the fried food arrive. It takes most of a morning and nobody's paying me for it. My wife Linda passed 9 years ago. Her garden tools are still in the shed. I don't use them. I don't move them either. My son Michael lives in Oregon. We talk once a month, which is the right amount for two people who love each other and have nothing in common. He works in software. He has never touched a piece of sheet metal in his life, and I've never asked him to. The company is at 520 Industrial Parkway. I know every pipe in that building, every splice and every wire. I know which compressor in Bay 2 sounds like it's laboring on cold mornings and what it means when it does. I know the names of every employee's spouse and most of their kids. Kevin Prosser came into the company in 2010. He contributed capital when we needed it for a hospital retrofit contract, a 30% ownership stake in exchange for cash he had and skills he didn't. That was a fair arrangement. He was good at sales. He was good with clients. He wore better suits than I did and remembered birthdays and played golf with the county purchasing managers, and that had value too. He called everyone chief. I thought it was a habit. Later I understood it was a posture, something he put on when he needed to be the most confident person in the room. I trusted him for 14 years. I want you to understand that. 14 years of quarterly meetings and joint decisions, and a partnership I treated as an obligation in good faith. The man attended Linda's funeral. He stood in my driveway in November rain and told me to take all the time I needed. When I think about that now, I let myself think about it for exactly as long as I need to. Then I move on. There was one thing. Early. A small thing. Early. A small thing. In 2022, Kevin hired a new project estimator without mentioning it to me until the paperwork was already done. When I asked him about it, he said he hadn't wanted to bother me while I was managing the school district contract. That was the answer I expected. I accepted it. I filed it somewhere I didn't look at very often. On a Tuesday morning in early July of 2023, I was in my office reviewing a service contract renewal when Kevin knocked on the door and said he had a suggestion. He sat down across from me and said the company had outgrown Brenda's spreadsheets. Those are the words he used. He said he wanted to bring in an outside accountant to streamline the bookkeeping, modernize things a little. I looked up from the contract. I looked at him for a moment. Brenda Lowell had been our office manager for 23 years. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain that clicked against her desk phone when she leaned forward. She knew every number in that company the way I knew every pipe in Bay 2. Not because she'd studied them, but because she'd lived with them. If there was a discrepancy in a vendor invoice, she'd find it in 4 minutes and have a phone number ready when she called you. I told Kevin that sounded fine. I went back to the contract. I did not say what I was thinking. At one more thing I wanted to check first. 2 months later, in September, Kevin and I had lunch at the diner on Route 40 the way we did most months. Patty melt for me, club sandwich for him, the same booth by the window that nobody else ever seemed to want. About halfway through the meal, Kevin asked me when I was thinking about retiring. He said it casually. He said his kids had been asking him about the future of the business, that they worried about stability. He said it with the particular gentleness of a man who wants you to think he's asking for personal reasons. I chewed my sandwich. I said a couple more years, probably. He nodded. He moved on. He ordered pie. I watched him eat the pie. I thought about the outside accountant. I thought about the estimator hired without a conversation. I thought about the word stability and what it implied about who might be causing instability. I didn't say any of that. I left the right amount for my half of the check and drove back to the shop. By November, Kevin had been to see a business broker. He told me over coffee near the county courthouse, very casually, like he was sharing interesting information, said he'd been trying to understand valuations in the current market. Slid a folder across the table. Printed comps, 5 or 6 of them, all showing companies in the same industry selling at or near book value. He pointed to one number in particular and said it was a strong comparable for our situation. I opened the folder. I looked at the comps. Then I closed it. Every one of those numbers was based on hard assets, equipment, receivables, real property. Not one of them reflected what a company like mine was actually worth. The 19-year relationship with the county maintenance director, the fact that the school district had renewed with us 6 times without a competitive bid, the hospital contract that came to us because the facilities manager had watched our crew work a midnight emergency and never forgotten it. Kevin was telling me what the company was worth. He'd decided. He'd gone and gotten the paperwork to prove it. I thanked him for the information. I took the folder home. I read it once more that night at my kitchen table, and then I set it down on top of Linda's old recipe box and went to bed. There was something building behind what I was seeing. I didn't have the shape of it yet, but I could feel it the way you feel a compressor starting to labor, not hearing the problem exactly, more like hearing the absence of a sound that should be there. January brought a parking lot conversation that I still think about. Kevin pulled his car next to the Ranger one morning and walked over to my window before I'd gotten out. He asked if I thought more about timing. Said he'd hate to see the company fall apart during a long transition. Fall apart. That was the phrase. I looked at him through the window glass for a moment. Then I got out of the truck. I told him I hadn't thought much about it lately. He nodded like that concerned him. He mentioned the outside accountant was flagging some inefficiencies. He used the word momentum. He used the word clarity. He said he wanted whatever happened to be good for both of us. I told him I appreciated that. I meant the part where he wanted it to be good for both of us. I just had a different understanding of what both of us meant than he did. I walked inside. I hung up my jacket. I started the coffee. I want you to understand something about me. I am not a man who confronts things before I understand them fully. This is not patience. It is not weakness. It is the same instinct that makes me walk a whole exhibition hall before I write anything on the clipboard. You don't mark a problem until you know what you're actually looking at. I knew I was looking at something. I did not yet know the full shape of it. The shape got clearer in March. Kevin brought draft buyout paperwork to my office, prepared by his guy, the business broker. The terms were book value plus 15%. He said it was more than fair for a clean exit. He slid it across my desk with both hands like he was presenting something generous. I picked it up. I read the first 4 pages in his presence. Then I told him I'd take it home. He said, of course. Take all the time I needed. I brought it to Sharon Dennison the following Monday. Sharon has been my attorney since 2005. She keeps a brass desk clock on her desk that was engraved with her late husband's name. He was an iron worker who died in a fall in 1998. She faces the clock toward her while she works. I have been in her office enough times to know she never moves it. She read the buyout paperwork while I sat across from her. Her glasses clicked against her desk phone when she leaned forward. She didn't say anything for a long time. What she said when she did speak is something I want to hold for a moment, because this is where everything I thought I understood started to come apart. She told me the paperwork transferred everything. The property, the contracts, the goodwill. The vendor relationships. Every asset the company had in language that looked reasonable until you read the definitions on page 6. She said Kevin's broker had written it to look like a partnership buyout. What it actually was closer to a full acquisition at a fraction of the value. I sat in that chair and looked at the brass clock. I told Sharon I hadn't signed anything. She said she knew. She said she'd been watching Kevin's behavior for longer than I had, and that she had some thoughts about what we might want to do while we still had time to do it. There was something she knew, something she had been carrying for some time, something I'm going to tell you about, but not yet. I left our office and drove back to the shop and finished the rest of my day. I checked the compressor in Bay 2. It sounded fine. In April, Kevin called me on a Saturday morning and said employees were talking, asking about stability. He sounded concerned. He sounded like a man who just heard troubling news and was passing it along reluctantly. I knew my crew. Terry Guzman had been with me since 2003. He kept a Carhartt jacket with his name stitched on the chest, hanging behind the shop door, even though he'd been supervising crews for 6 years and hadn't been on the tools in longer than that. He was not the kind of man who talked behind backs. None of my people were. The concern Kevin was performing on that phone call was something he'd manufactured. I don't know when I fully understood that. But I mentioned the call to Sharon the following Monday, and she didn't look surprised. We started building something, quietly. I'm not going to tell you what it was yet. In May, Kevin scheduled a transition planning meeting with Brenda, Terry, and the outside accountant. He didn't invite me. Brenda came to my office that afternoon, glasses clicking against her phone as she sat down. She told me what had been on the agenda. She said Kevin had run it like he was already the principal decision-maker, like he was the one who would be signing things going forward. She said it carefully. She's worked for me for 23 years. She didn't need to editorialize. I thanked her. I went to see Sharon that evening. I told her it was time to move faster. What we were building, we started building faster. Kevin had shown me the full shape of it now. He wasn't waiting for my retirement. He was scheduling it. There was still one thing he hadn't accounted for, one thing that was going to make everything he'd built go sideways before he ever reached the finish line. I had been sitting on that one thing for a while. I want to tell you what it is, but first I want to tell you about Brenda's last piece of information. If you've been in a situation where someone you trusted started treating your life like a transaction, I want you to leave that in the comments, because what I'm about to describe in the next few minutes is the part where all of it comes together. And I found it helps to know you're not alone in having trusted the wrong person. Subscribe if you're not already with me, because what happens next is the part that took 42 years to set up and 4 days to execute. Let's keep going. On June 11th, 3 days before my retirement party, Kevin stopped Brenda in the office hallway and told her he was moving the transition meeting. It had been scheduled for the Tuesday after the party. He moved it to the Monday immediately following. Said he wanted to keep momentum going. Said he wanted to handle everything while the energy was good. Brenda told me that afternoon. She said it the way she says most things. Plainly, without dramatics, like she was reading from a work order. Kevin moved the meeting up. Said he wanted to handle everything while the energy was good. I just thought you should know. I thanked her. I went home. I sat in my kitchen for about an hour. Then I drove to the shop and looked for something in my desk drawer that I hadn't needed in a while. A small digital voice recorder, the kind I used to use for site notes before everyone had a phone. I put in fresh batteries. I tested it. I brought it to my own retirement party on the evening of June 14th, Friday. I set it on the credenza in the boardroom before the guests arrived, and I pressed record. The party was what a retirement party is. People I'd known for decades. Cake with my name on it. Handshakes. A few people who got emotional. Terry stood in the corner most of the night, which is where Terry always stands. Kevin circulated. He called people chief. He was in his element. Around 8:15, most of the guests had gone. Kevin stayed. He moved into the boardroom with someone I recognized as the outside accountant. I was not in the boardroom. I was saying goodbye to people near the front door. The recorder was on the credenza, running. I want you to stay with me here. Kevin didn't know the room was still recording. He was relaxed. He was confident. He had been building this for 11 months, and as far as he knew, Friday night was the last easy breath before Monday's formalities. He used the word chief 4 times in 2 minutes. I know, because I counted later, and at some point in that conversation, he said the sentence that had probably been living in him for a while. Walter's done. He just doesn't know how done yet. I heard those words for the first time 2 days later, sitting alone in my kitchen on a Sunday morning with headphones and a cup of coffee. I listened to the relevant section 3 times. Then I took off the headphones and sat there for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Sharon Dennison. Now I'm going to tell you what Kevin Prosser never knew. Sharon Dennison is not only my attorney, she has been my attorney since 2005, 19 years. In those 19 years, she built something with me that Kevin never saw. Because Kevin thought he understood the legal structure of our partnership, and he didn't understand it at all. Sharon is the registered agent for the company's operating LLC. That means any document filed with that entity, any ownership restructuring, any transfer motion, any amendment to the operating agreement, crossed her desk before it reached the county recorder's office. Kevin had attempted to file a restructuring document on June 10th, 4 days before the party. 4 days before he sat in my boardroom and said what he said. That document sat in Sharon's inbox. She called me. I told her to hold it. I wanted the recording first. She had it by 7:43 p.m. on the night of the party. I emailed the audio file to her encrypted server from the parking lot before I drove home. There was also the matter of WJM Services LLC. In 2019, during a refinancing Kevin never questioned, I established a secondary company, registered it myself, advised by Sharon, structured quietly. WJM Services holds the company's vehicle fleet, the specialized equipment, the service contracts. Kevin owns 30% of the operating LLC. He owns nothing in WJM Services. Nothing. He had been trying to buy a company. What he could actually acquire legally was a client list, a leasehold at 5720 Industrial Parkway that had 90 days remaining, and a cash reserve account that had already been closed and transferred before the party. The trucks were mine. The equipment was mine. The active service contracts were mine. The municipal relationships, the ones that made the $1.8 million in active work exist in the first place, were built on my name and my 42 years, and they were not transferable to a man the county had never seen with a wrench in his hand. Sharon drafted the forensic accounting motion and the emergency injunction that Saturday. She filed both documents electronically at 8:02 a.m. on Monday morning. Kevin's transition meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. He had no idea what was waiting for him. I need to tell you what happened on Monday evening. I went to see Sharon to go over the documents one more time, and she looked up from the banker's boxes on her conference table, and she said, "I've been waiting 14 years for you to see what I saw. Let's lock the doors before he knows they're closing." I had known Sharon long enough to know she didn't say things like that lightly. I also knew she had been watching Kevin since before I had. She had been advising the secondary structure, the asset separation, the registered agent arrangement for years. Not because she expected this moment, because she believed in being prepared for it. I told her to proceed. She asked me if I was sure. Not because she doubted the decision, because she understood the cost of it. 14 years of partnership, however it ended. A company I'd spent 42 years building, now entering a legal process. People whose paychecks depended on the outcome. I thought about it for the right amount of time. I told her I was sure. On Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., Kevin Prosser walked into the boardroom at 5720 Industrial Parkway with his business broker and a notary. He was expecting to sign papers. He was expecting a transition. He had momentum. He had his guy. Sharon Dennison was sitting in my chair with 2 banker's boxes and a leather folder. Terry Guzman was standing inside the door. I was at the fairgrounds. It was early enough in June that the exhibition hall still smelled clean. I walked the furnace rooms with my clipboard. I checked filters. I checked belts. I made my notes. I did what I do every year before the fair opens. Sharon presented the forensic accounting motion. She presented the injunction. She presented the injunction. She presented the lease termination notice for the property. She distributed copies of letters from the hospital, the school district, and the county, all three suspending active work pending resolution of the ownership dispute. Two of those letters cited Kevin's name specifically as the source of the concern. Then she played 90 seconds of audio. Walter's done. He just doesn't know how done yet. Kevin's voice. In Kevin's words. In the room where he'd said them 4 days earlier. The meeting ended at 9:47 a.m. Sharon told Kevin it was over. Terry walked Kevin and his broker to the parking lot. He stood there and watched them drive away. I got the call from Terry at 10:15 while I was sitting in the Ranger outside the fairgrounds writing up my checklist. He didn't say much. He said what he said the way Terry says things. Direct. Without ceremony. If you're burning it down, he told me the morning I explained everything. I'll help you carry the gas can. He didn't need to carry anything. Sharon had handled it before Kevin sat down. That afternoon I drove to Raymond Coulter's office. Raymond is 71 years old. He drives a 1996 Buick LeSabre he bought new and services himself. The passenger seat has a permanent crease from his tackle box. He runs a small commercial real estate outfit out of a converted Victorian on Merchant Street, and he has seen, in his time, most of what business partnerships can do to people. He'd offered me his conference room at the beginning of June, back when I was still deciding how to move. He'd said it simply, I've got the conference room in my office until 5. You need it, it's yours, no questions. He kept that promise. No questions. He poured coffee and he left me alone. I sat in that room for 20 minutes. I didn't think about Kevin. I thought about the shop. I thought about Terry's jacket hanging behind the door. I thought about Brenda's glasses clicking against her phone. I thought about 35 people who had shown up year after year because something I built was worth showing up to. Then I thought about Linda's garden tools in the shed, and how I'd told myself for 9 years that I'd figure out what to do with them eventually. Raymond came back in with the coffee pot. He raised his eyebrows. I told him I was keeping the Ranger. It was the first time I'd smiled in a month. Kevin thought he saw a tired old man with a cracked dash and a dead wife's tools in the shed. He saw the 287,000 miles. He didn't see what it took to drive them. Walter's done, he said. He just doesn't know how done yet. He was right about one thing. Somebody in that story was done. He just got the name wrong. I walked out of Raymond's office at 4:30 in the afternoon. The air was warm and the parking lot was quiet and the Buick was sitting in the same spot it always is. I drove back to the shop. The lights were on. The compressor in Bay 2 sounded fine. I'd been building things for 42 years. I knew how to recognize when something was solid. This one was solid.